Imagine you just joined the College of Winterhold because you figured, hey, why not learn some magic? And then, out of nowhere, time just stops. Everyone freezes except you and this mysterious robed figure who materializes out of thin air. He tells you cryptic things about being watched, about some dangerous artifact, and that you'll be judged. Then poof, he vanishes, time resumes, and everyone acts like nothing happened. That's your introduction to the Psijic order. And right there, in that moment, you should probably realize something. These people are shady as hell. Today, we're going through the entire history of the Psijic order, examining why literally nobody in Tamriel trusts them, and looking at theories about what they're really up to. Because the more you dig into these guys, the more concerning it gets. Let's start at the very beginning. Way back in the Merethic era, when the Altmer were first settling the Somerset Isles after leaving their homeland of Aldmeris, something major happened in their society. The Altmer culture was going through this huge religious shift. Originally, they practiced ancestor worship. They honored all their ancestors, the spirits of the dead, treating them all with respect and reverence. It was pretty egalitarian in a spiritual sense. Every ancestor mattered. Your great-grandmother who was a farmer had the same spiritual significance as someone's great-grandfather who was a hero. The dead were the dead, and they all deserved respect. This system made sense in the context of Aldmeri beliefs. They believed that the Aedra and Daedra were once mortals who obtained great power in the afterlife. The distinction between a powerful ancestor spirit and a divine being wasn't sharp. Everyone had the potential for spiritual ascension after death. It was, in a weird way, democratic. Your bloodline didn't determine your spiritual worth, but then the upper class decided they wanted to change things. Instead of worshipping all ancestors equally, they started elevating only the ancestors that the elite claimed as their progenitors. Suddenly, certain ancestor spirits like Oriel, Trinimac, Cirabane, and Finaster weren't just honored ancestors anymore. They were being elevated to full god status. These spirits became the Aedra, the traditional Aldmeri pantheon. They were set apart, placed above all other spirits, and worshipped as divine rather than simply venerated as powerful ancestors. This was political, right? It was a way for the aristocracy to solidify their power. They could claim divine ancestry while everybody else's ancestors became less important. A social hierarchy backed by religion. Pretty standard stuff for feudal societies. If your family could trace their lineage back to Trinimac or Cirabane, suddenly you had divine blood. You weren't just nobility, you were descended from gods. That gave you legitimacy that regular nobles didn't have. And this wasn't just about prestige, it translated into actual social structure. The Pocket Guide to the Empire describes how Aldmeri society developed a strict class hierarchy. At the top were the wise, teachers and priests. Then came the artists, followed by princes, warriors, landowners, merchants, and workers. Below, even the workers were beasts, like enslaved goblins who did the jobs that were beneath the dignity of even the lowest Altmer. This hierarchy was reinforced by the new religious structure. If certain families had divine blood, of course they should be at the top. It's the natural order, sanctioned by the gods themselves. But not everyone was cool with this. A group of Altmer elders straight up refused to accept this change. They called themselves the Psijics, which comes from Psiji, which itself was derived from PSJJJ, one of the original names for Padome, the force of change and chaos in Aldmeri cosmology. Yeah, they named themselves after the force of chaos. That should have been red flag number 1. Why Padome? Well, in Aldmeri metaphysics, you have Anu and Padome, stasis and change, order and chaos. They're the fundamental opposing forces from which everything else emerges. By naming themselves after Padome, the Psijics were making a statement. They were associating themselves with change, with continuous transformation, with the rejection of static hierarchy. Padome is described as an ineffable entity, impossible to fully understand or predict. The Psijics were claiming that same ineffability for themselves. It's interesting that a group rebelling against religious change would name themselves after the force of change. But I think the point was that they were embracing the right kind of change, the eternal, natural change of the universe, as opposed to the artificial, politically motivated change that the Altmer elite were imposing on society, or at least that's how they justified it to themselves. These elders used their magical powers to literally remove themselves from Somerset society. They took over a nearby island called Artaeum and set up shop there, calling themselves the keepers of the old ways. They claimed Altmer society had become corrupted and they needed to preserve the original ancestor worship practices. Very, we're the real elves, you guys have lost your way energy. And let's be clear about what this meant. These weren't just a bunch of disgruntled elves moving to a new neighborhood. These were powerful mages who used magic to claim an entire island and establish what was basically a separate micronation. They had enough magical ability to make this stick, which suggests they were among the most powerful mages in Altmer society. The elite couldn't stop them or force them to come back. The island they chose, Artaeum, was the third largest in the Somerset archipelago. It's located south of the Mordunon region, near the villages of Potanza and Runcibe. The island itself features idyllic orchards, misty woodlands, and coastlines of silver coral. It's described as beautiful, almost otherworldly. The perfect place for a group of mages who think they're too enlightened for regular society. On the northern tip of Artaeum stands Sephora Tower, which would become the headquarters of the Psijic Order. Here's something interesting. Sephora Tower predates High Elven society by several hundred years. It was already there when the Psijics arrived. Who built it? We don't know. But it's a massive structure with unique architecture that doesn't match typical Altmer design. The Psijics just moved in and claimed it as their own. This raises questions about what was on Artaeum before the Psijics got there. Was it inhabited? Were there previous occupants who built Sephora Tower? Did the Psijics displace someone else to establish their order? The lore doesn't say, which is typical for the Psijics. Inconvenient details get left out of the official history. Now here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just leave and mind their own business. The lore tells us they frequently returned to the Somerset Isles to offer advice and guidance. So they thought Altmer society was corrupted enough to physically remove themselves from it, but they also felt entitled to come back and tell everyone how to run things. They were like that family member who moves away because they hate your lifestyle choices but still shows up at Thanksgiving to lecture everyone. Think about the psychology here. The Psijics believed Altmer society was corrupt, but they also believed they had the wisdom to fix it if people would just listen to them. They thought they were so much smarter and more enlightened than everyone else that they needed their own island to properly pursue their studies, but also that everyone else needed their guidance. It's an incredibly arrogant position, and they weren't offering advice from a position of equality. The lore specifically describes them as providing counsel from a position of superiority, viewing those they advised as lesser men. Even their book, The Old Ways, talks about how they would give grave and faithful counsel to rulers, but it's always framed as the wise Psijics deigning to help the poor, misguided masses. The earliest recorded instance of the Psijic order in writing is from the year 20 of the First Era. A renowned Breton sage named Vornat traveled all the way to Artaeum and met with Iacasis, who was already the Rite Master at that point. That means Iacasis was leading the order from extremely early on. He would continue to be Rite Master for thousands of years, which tells you something about how the Psijics view change and succession. They talk a lot about change as a force, but their actual leadership apparently stays the same for millennia. So from the very beginning, you have an organization that positioned itself as both separate from and superior to the rest of society. They rejected the corruption of the mainstream while insisting they should still advise that mainstream. They valued knowledge and wisdom, but only for themselves and those they deemed worthy. They were the keepers of truth who had no interest in actually spreading that truth. These contradictions were baked into the order from day one, and they've never been resolved. The Psijic Order has always been an organization that wants the benefits of influence without the responsibilities that come with it. They want to shape events, but not be accountable for the outcomes. They want to be revered for their wisdom, but not questioned about their methods. And all of this traces back to those founding elders who decided they were too good for regular society, but also too important not to interfere in it. So what exactly are the old ways that the Psijics claim to follow? Is this complex system mixing mysticism, something called the 11 Forces, and worship of the El Nofe, those Adric spirits who established the foundations of the world? They call their version of mysticism the Elder Way, and they claim it binds the forces of nature to individual will through meditation and study. Let's break this down because it's deliberately confusing. The problem is the term old ways gets used for like 3 different things. It refers to their religious beliefs, their magical practices, and their philosophy all at once. It's intentionally vague. When you try to pin down exactly what the old ways are, Psijic texts just give you this semantic quagmire of overlapping concepts. Convenient, right? The magical aspect is described as mysticism, but the Psijics call it the Elder Way to distinguish their version from what other mages practice. According to their texts, it's a philosophy of mediation and study, said to bind the forces of nature to the individual will. It differs from regular magicka in origin, but the effects are supposedly the same. So it's magic that's not quite magic, or it's magic from a different source, but it does the same things. Clear as mud. Some scholars believe the Elder Way was taught to the Psijics by the original inhabitants of Tamriel, whoever they were before the Aldmer arrived. This would mean the Psijics are practicing a form of magic that predates Altmer civilization entirely. That would explain why Sapora Tower predates High Elven architecture. Maybe the Psijics found something on Artaeum that taught them these techniques. Maybe there were others there before them who passed down this knowledge. But here's where it gets frustrating. The Psijics won't clarify any of this. Later, scholarly debate suggests mysticism is much less spiritual than originally supposed, and that either intellect or emotional state is sufficient to influence its energy configuration and flow. So, is it spiritual or psychological? Is it about communion with ancestor spirits or about mental discipline? The Psijics have had thousands of years to explain this clearly, and they choose not to. The 11 Forces are supposedly divine laws that define reality itself. Change is considered the most important force, which again connects to their naming after Padome. The forces are what the conclave of the 11 Forces, the ruling council of the order, is named after. But we don't actually know what all 11 forces are. The Psijics keep that information to themselves. We know change is one. We know the Psijics talk about bringing about good change while avoiding Oagnithir or bad change. But what are the other 10 forces? Gravity, time, causality, energy, life, death, love? The Lord just doesn't say. And you can bet the Psijics aren't going to publish a textbook explaining them. Why not? If these are fundamental laws of reality, wouldn't understanding them benefit everyone? Wouldn't a proper understanding of these forces help all mages improve their craft? Wouldn't philosophers and scholars benefit from knowing the principles that undergird existence? Yes, obviously. But the Psijics don't share this information because it's part of their power base. The more exclusive knowledge they have, the more indispensable they are. There's also this concept of the Psijics, studying to understand what holds the world together and what could threaten it. Lawrence Schick, the lore master for ESO, describes them as being primarily interested in learning the fundamental basics of the world and universe. But again, why keep that secret? If you know what threatens reality, shouldn't you tell people so they can help prevent those threats? Unless you don't trust anyone else to handle that knowledge, which brings us back to their fundamental elitism. The religious aspect focuses on the Elnofei and the Archariai. The Elnofei are those Edric spirits who sacrifice themselves to create Nirn. In Aldmeri mythology, the creation of the mortal world required spirits to give up their divine nature and become the substance of the world itself. The ground, the sky, the laws of physics, all of it came from these sacrificed spirits. The Psijics revere these spirits, particularly the Archerai, whom they believe are the progenitor spirits responsible for all mortal races. This is in contrast to the mainstream Altmer religion that elevates specific ancestors like Auriel and Trinimac. The Psijics worship the more abstract primordial spirits rather than the named gods. It's a more esoteric practice, which fits their image as mysterious scholars. But even this religious aspect is muddled. The old ways supposedly include rituals like the rites of Moawita and the Vaeglid, which are performed to weaken evil spirits and benefit good spirits. What makes a spirit evil or good? The Psijics decide, presumably. What do these rituals actually do? We don't know, because the specific methods aren't shared. There's a concept in their philosophy about layers of understanding. Sota Sil, who trained Psijic initiates, explained it like this. The common man looks at an object and fits it into a place in his way of thinking. Those skilled in the old ways, in the way of the Psijic, in mysticism, can see an object and identify it by its proper role, but one more layer is needed to be peeled back to achieve understanding. You must identify the object by its role and its truth and interpret that meaning. Sounds deep, right? But what does that actually mean in practical terms? The common person sees surface appearances. The Psijic sees deeper meaning. But there's always another layer of understanding that the Psijic has accessed that you haven't. It's a self-reinforcing hierarchy of knowledge where the Psijic is always one step ahead of you. You can never quite reach their level of understanding because there's always another layer they know about that you don't. This creates an unfalsifiable claim to wisdom. No matter what you learn or understand, the Psijic can always claim to understand it better, to see deeper meanings, to access layers of truth you can't perceive. It's intellectually dishonest because it makes their claims impossible to verify or challenge. If you disagree with a Psijic's interpretation, you're just demonstrating that you haven't reached the appropriate layer of understanding yet. The Psijics also developed something called the Cloven duality, though details about what this actually is are scarce. They created the Psijic compensation, which was their attempt to explain Aldmeri religion to Emperor Uriel V. This explanation carefully avoided blaming Lorcan, who was still respected in Cyrodiil as Shezar. So the Psijics were willing to adapt their religious explanations based on political considerations. They'd softened their actual beliefs to maintain good relations with powerful rulers. What does this tell us? That the old ways aren't as rigid or sacred as the Psijics make them out to be. They're willing to compromise or obscure their actual beliefs when it's politically convenient. The truth is flexible depending on who's asking and what the Psijics want from them. There's also this whole element about ancestor worship and the 11 forces being combined into a philosophy and way of life. It's described as involving deep understanding of space and life as fundamental concepts. But again, what does that actually mean? How do you achieve this understanding? What does it change about how you interact with the world? The lore mentions that the Psijics believe effort must be made to bring about good change. They try to avoid oignitir, bad change. But who decides what change is good and what's bad? The Psijics do. They've set themselves up as the ultimate arbiters of what's beneficial for reality itself. If they decide something is bad, change it is. If they decide something is good, change it is. There's no external standard, no objective measure, no democratic process, just the Psijic's judgment. Think about the arrogance in that position. They're not just saying they understand magic better than everyone else. They're claiming to understand the fundamental forces that define existence, and they get to decide which changes are good for the universe. They're positioning themselves not just as scholars or mages, but as cosmic guardians whose understanding surpasses ordinary morality or reason. And here's the thing, maybe they do understand reality better than most people. Maybe they have accessed genuine insights into how the universe works. But they've never demonstrated this in any verifiable way. They just assert it and expect everyone to take their word for it. And because they have immense magical power, people do. Power becomes its own validation. The texts mention that the Psijic order was indirectly responsible for the development of mysticism long before there was a name for it. So, they pioneered this school of magic that would later be recognized and categorized by other mages. That's legitimately impressive, but they kept it to themselves for centuries before it spread elsewhere. How many problems could have been solved if they'd shared that knowledge earlier? How many lives could have been saved or improved with access to mysticism? But that's not how the Psijics think. Knowledge isn't for sharing. Knowledge is for collecting and hoarding. It's what makes them special, what makes them powerful, what makes them indispensable. If everyone had access to the same understanding, the Psijics wouldn't be superior anymore. So the knowledge stays secret, wrapped in vague terminology and esoteric philosophy that discourages outsiders from understanding it. The philosophy of meditation and study binding forces to individual will sounds almost like they're describing a form of personal power that bypasses the need for worship or submission to higher beings. While other mages draw power from Aetherius or make bargains with Daedra, the Psijics claim to access power through pure understanding and discipline. That would make them independent in a way that other magic users aren't. But if that's true, it's even more reason to share the knowledge. If you can teach people to access power without needing to submit to Daedric princes or rely on risky magical sources, shouldn't you? Wouldn't that make Tamriel safer and better? Unless, of course, you don't actually care about making the world better. Unless what you care about is maintaining your position as the only ones who possess this special knowledge. Let's talk about Artaeum itself, because this place is weird in ways that go beyond just being the headquarters of a shady organization. It's described as the third largest island in the Somerset archipelago, but here's the thing, it doesn't stay in one place. Multiple sources mention that Artaeum is difficult to chart geographically because it shifts continuously either at random or by decree of the council. The island moves around. Now, islands don't normally do that. Islands are attached to the ocean floor. They're stable landmasses. But Artaeum apparently just drifts around the archipelago, showing up in different locations at different times. Is this natural? Is it magical? The Psijics don't explain, but the implications are wild. If the island moves, that means the Psijics have control over a massive landmass and can relocate it at will. That's not just powerful magic, that's reshaping geography through force of will. But that's not even the weirdest part. Artaeum has completely vanished from reality at least twice, possibly more times that we don't have records of. Not just hidden or made invisible, actually removed from Nirn entirely. The first disappearance happened right around the end of the First Era, roughly coinciding with when the Mages Guild was founded. The timing is suspicious. Vanus Galerion establishes an organization that opposes everything the Psijics stand for, and suddenly the Psijics vanish. Coincidence? One Psijic member named Oriandra said they sent the island away to better promote meditative study and contemplation, so they needed to remove themselves from reality to study properly. What were they studying that required that level of isolation? What were they doing that they couldn't do while remaining part of Tamriel? Were they afraid of being disturbed? Or were they doing something they didn't want anyone to observe? Another Psijic, Tendinwe, mentions that the Order can make the island intangible. You could sail right through where Artaeum should be and find nothing there. The island would just phase out of existence in a way that lets matter pass through it. That's not invisibility, that's manipulating the fundamental nature of matter and space. Think about what this means. The Psijics can make their entire headquarters non-corporeal. They can remove it from the physical plane entirely, and they can do this voluntarily, with planning and preparation. It's not some emergency evacuation spell. It's a calculated move that requires organization and coordination. The entire Order, everyone living on Artaeum, everything on the island, all of it disappears together. It stayed gone for exactly 500 years. That's a very specific time frame. Not 498 years, not 503 years. Exactly 5 centuries. That suggests it wasn't random or accidental. They planned to be gone for that long. They had a reason for that specific duration. Then it reappeared during the Second Era, during what's called the Interregnum, the period when the Empire had collapsed, and 3 different alliances were fighting over Cyrodiil. The political situation was chaotic. Multiple Daedric princes were active on Tamriel, and suddenly the Psijics returned. But when the island came back, something was fundamentally wrong. The original council of the Psijic Order, including their leader, Right Master Iachesis, didn't return with the island. They were just gone, completely missing, vanished. The Psijics who did return either couldn't or wouldn't explain what happened to them or where they'd been. Let's think about this carefully. The island disappeared with everyone on it. Then it returned with some of those people missing, specifically the entire leadership structure. The returning Psijics had no explanation or they refused to provide one. That's not normal. That's deeply concerning. What happened during those 500 years? Where did they actually go? Did they leave Nirn entirely and travel to some other plane of existence? Did they go forward or backward in time? Did they exist in some pocket dimension? Were they suspended in a state outside normal reality? And what happened to Iasis and the original council? Did they die? Did they choose not to return? Were they unable to return? Did something happen during those 500 years that prevented them from coming back? Or did they go somewhere else entirely, leaving the rest of the Order behind? The returning Psijics took over without providing any answers. They resumed operations with a new leadership structure, and nobody outside the Order knows why or how. That's not transparency. That's a conspiracy. When the entire governing body of an organization disappears and gets replaced, and nobody will explain what happened, that's a massive red flag. Some theories suggest the disappearance was related to dealing with Daedric threats. There's mention of the Psijics fighting against the combined might of Azura, Clavicus Vile, Mephala, and a sea slode named Ktora, all of whom were trying to steal something called the Heart of Transparent Law. Maybe the Psijics took Artaeum somewhere else to prevent these entities from accessing it. Maybe they were fighting a war on another plane and Iachesis died in that conflict. But we don't know because the Psijics won't say, and the fact that they won't explain is itself revealing. If the disappearance was noble and justified, if they were heroically saving the world from Daedric invasion, why keep it secret? Why not tell people we disappeared because we were fighting Prince so-and-so on another plane to protect Tamriel? That would make them look good. It would justify their absence and their secrecy. Unless the real reason doesn't make them look good. Unless what they were actually doing is something they don't want people to know about. Maybe they weren't fighting Daedric princes. Maybe they were making deals with them, maybe they were conducting experiments that required being outside normal reality. Maybe they learned or did something during those 500 years that they can't afford to have known. The disappearance also coincided with the founding of the Mages Guild, which can't be ignored. Vanus Galerian founded the guild in 2E 230. Artaeum vanished around the end of the First Era or very beginning of the Second. The timing suggests the Psijic saw the guild being established and decided they didn't want to stick around for what would happen next. The Mages Guild represented everything the Psijics opposed. It democratized magic, it spread knowledge freely, it established chapters across Tamriel where anyone could come and learn. The guild was popular, growing rapidly, and directly challenging the Psijics' monopoly on advanced magical knowledge. Maybe the Psijics couldn't handle that. Maybe they ran away rather than compete. Or maybe they knew that having both organizations active at the same time would create conflict, and they chose to remove themselves to avoid it. But if that's true, it's still cowardly. Instead of working with the guild or trying to reform, they just disappeared and left everyone else to figure things out. When Artaeum returned 500 years later, the Mages Guild was the dominant magical organization in Tamriel. The Psijics had lost their influence. They were barely known outside of scholarly circles. Their return was noted more as a curiosity than a major event. They'd been irrelevant for so long that most people didn't even remember them. The second disappearance happened around the year 100 of the Fourth Era. Again, the timing is suspicious. This was right around when the Thalmor were consolidating power and when the Void Nights happened. Those 2 years when the moons disappeared from the sky, which terrified the Khajiit and created political chaos. The Void Nights ended around the same time Artaeum disappeared. The Aldmeri Dominion took credit for bringing the moons back, which solidified their power and allowed them to manipulate elsewhere. And the Psijics vanished right as this was happening. Were they involved in causing the Void Nights? Were they trying to prevent them? Or were they just running away from the rising Thalmor threat? The Thalmor considered the Psijics to be enemies and traitors. The two groups had fundamental ideological differences. The Thalmor represent Altmer supremacy and authoritarianism. The Psijics rejected Altmer society and operate independently. From the Thalmor's perspective, the Psijics are a rogue organization that doesn't submit to Altmer authority. The Psijics would be a problem for the Dominion's plans. So maybe the Psijics disappeared to avoid conflict with the Thalmor. They saw the Dominion rising, recognized they'd be targets, and just peaced out, abandoned Tamriel to deal with the Thalmor threat alone while they hid somewhere safe. That would be consistent with their pattern of non-intervention during crises. The island stayed gone for about 100 years. Then it reappeared briefly during the events of Skyrim in 4E 201, but only long enough for the Psijics to deal with the Eye of Magnus situation. After that, they presumably vanished again. So they showed up for one specific purpose, dealt with it, and left. They didn't stick around to help with the civil war in Skyrim. They didn't intervene in the conflict with the Aldmeri Dominion. They didn't help deal with the Dragon Crisis. They just grabbed what they wanted and disappeared. This pattern of appearing only when they decide something is important enough is telling. They're not part of Tamriel's community. They're not invested in the well-being of the people living there. They're observers and occasional interventionists who maintain their own separate agenda. Tamriel can be on fire, and the Psijics won't help unless the fire threatens something they care about. The ability to remove your entire base of operations from reality is an insane level of power. It means the Psijics can act in the world, but nobody can ever hold them accountable because they can just vanish. That's not an organization operating in good faith. That's an organization that wants unilateral power with zero oversight. They can interfere in events, manipulate situations, collect artifacts, and then disappear before anyone can question what they're doing or demand accountability. And the mechanics of how they do this are never explained. How do you move an entire island to another plane? How many Psijics does it take? What magical principles are involved? Is it dangerous? Does it require artifacts or special preparation? What happens to the people on the island when it phases out? Do they experience time differently? Can they still age? Do they know where they are? All of these questions go unanswered because the Psijics don't explain themselves. And the fact that they have this capability means you can never trust that they're really gone. When Artaeum disappears, you don't know if the Psijics are actually inactive or if they're just observing from somewhere else. They could still be watching, they could still be manipulating events. You just can't see them anymore. It's the ultimate power move. Complete control over whether they participate in reality or not. They get to decide when and where they exist in a way that nobody can predict or counter. If you try to attack Artaeum, they just make it intangible. If you try to spy on them, they disappear. If you demanded accountability, they'd vanish. They've built an institution that's literally impossible to hold responsible for its actions. Throughout history, the Psijic Order has maintained this role as advisors to rulers across Tamriel. They describe themselves as providing grave and faithful counsel to emperors and kings. The lore says their counsel has been sought by some political leaders, but other leaders have treated the Order with suspicion. Here's the thing though, the Psijics seem to consider their advice superior, regardless of whether anyone asks for it. Multiple sources describe them offering counsel from a position of superiority, viewing those they advise as lesser men. Even their own texts talk about how they only bother to share knowledge with people they deem worthy or who can meet them on an equal basis, which, given their power and secrecy, basically means nobody ever meets them on equal terms. The Pocket Guide to the Empire mentions that they've been successful as advisors, but there's this undercurrent that they're also kind of condescending about it. They retreated from their advisory role and withdrew to isolation, but they still pop up when they decide something is important enough. They don't serve the rulers of Tamriel, they deign to occasionally guide them when it suits their purposes, and we have evidence of their advisory role going wrong. The Psijic compensation, which is their explanation of Aldmeri religion, was given to Emperor Uriel V. That guy went on to launch disastrous military campaigns in Akavir that ended with most of his forces dead. Now, we don't know if the Psijics advised him to do that, but he was getting counsel from them during his reign, and his judgment was catastrophically bad. There are mentions in the lore of rulers forbidding the Mages Guild in their domains, and while that's about the guild and not the Psijics directly, it suggests that powerful magical organizations inserting themselves into politics makes rulers nervous. The Psijics were doing this long before the Mages Guild existed, and their track record isn't great. We need to talk about the Order's biggest failure, and that's Manimarco, the King of Worms, one of the most destructive figures in Tamriel's history, and he was trained by the Psijic Order. Let's go through this in excruciating detail because it reveals everything wrong with how the Psijics operate. Manimarco joined the Order sometime in the First Era. According to the lore, he came from a noble house, possibly even had royal blood, though which family is never specified. He was recruited young, identified as having exceptional magical talent. The Psijics saw potential in him and brought him to Artaeum for training. He and another student named Vanus Galerion became the two brightest talents the Order had seen in generations, possibly ever. They were both brilliant, and they pushed each other to greater heights. Their relationship started as a friendship built on mutual respect. They recognized in each other a level of intelligence and magical ability that their peers couldn't match. They were both outsiders in a way, Manimarco from whatever noble house he came from, Galerion from a background as a servant who taught himself to read against his lord's wishes. Their debates on magical theory captivated other Psijics and established principles that are still studied millennia later. We have records of their dialogues, philosophical arguments about the nature of magic and reality. In one recorded debate, they discussed whether magica truly exists as an external force or is simply the manifestation of a mage's will. Galerion demonstrated that magic requires consent and can't simply be imposed on reality. Manimarco argued that magica is neither moral nor immoral and is limited only by the will of the caster. This wasn't just abstract philosophy. These were the foundational questions that would shape how magic was understood and practiced for centuries. And both of them were brilliant enough to make significant contributions to magical theory while still students. The fact that the Psijic order let both of them leave is one of the most baffling decisions in their history. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about what Manimarco was actually doing on Arteum. He was studying necromancy, and not just casual dabbling, he was deep into it. He was trapping souls, experimenting on the dead, doing exactly the kind of dark magic that everyone agrees is horrific. The lore describes him as conducting forbidden experiments with necromancy. He was using souls in his magical research, which violates pretty much every ethical principle that most societies hold. The fact that necromancy was forbidden means the Psijics had rules against it. They knew it was dangerous and wrong. They had presumably banned the practice for good reasons. And yet Manimarco was able to study it extensively, build up a body of research, develop new techniques, and recruit other students to work with him, all under the Psijics' noses. And he wasn't doing this in secret in some hidden cave on the other side of Tamriel. He was doing it on Arteum, in vaults beneath the Psijic headquarters, with a group of other students who were also into necromancy. The lore specifically mentions he had colleagues and followers who were working with him. This wasn't a solo operation. It was a whole research program happening right under Sephora Tower. How did this happen? How did the supposedly wise and all-knowing Psijics not notice one of their brightest students was conducting forbidden magical research with multiple collaborators? Were they not paying attention? Did they not care? Did they think it was fine as long as it stayed on the island? The most charitable interpretation is that the Psijics value academic freedom and don't closely monitor what their students study. Even forbidden topics might be researched as long as it's done carefully, but that doesn't hold up, because when they did find out, they immediately recognized it as wrong enough to expel Manimarco, so they did have standards. They just weren't enforcing them until it was too late. A less charitable interpretation is that the Psijics knew and didn't care until it became politically inconvenient. Maybe they were interested in what Manimarco was discovering. Maybe they thought they could control him. Maybe they believed that all knowledge was valuable, even knowledge gained through unethical means. They wouldn't be the first academic institution to look the other way when a brilliant researcher was doing questionable things. Vanus Galerion discovered what was happening when Manimarco invited him to join their group. Vanus entered the vault and saw the necromantic experiments, the trapped souls, the corpses being used for research. He was horrified. He tried to convince Manimarco to stop, to turn away from this path. Manimarco tried to recruit Vanus, arguing that necromancy was just another form of magic, that the only immorality was in how you chose to use it. When Vanus couldn't convince Manimarco, he went to Rightmaster Iakesis and reported everything. And what did Iakesis do? He expelled Manimarco and his followers from the order. Just kicked them out. That's it. Let me be clear about how insane this is. Manimarco wasn't some student caught cheating on a test. He was trapping sapient souls, the souls of thinking, feeling beings, and using them for experiments. He was experimenting on corpses, learning how to manipulate the dead. He was well on his way to becoming a lich, an undead abomination that sustains itself by consuming souls. And the Psijic Order's response was, "You can't come to our island anymore." They didn't imprison him. They didn't try to stop him. They didn't destroy his research or confiscate his materials. They didn't even bind his magic or restrict his abilities. They just said, "Leave," and washed their hands of the situation. They took absolutely no responsibility for what they trained him to do or what he might do next. And they didn't warn anyone outside Artaeum what he'd been doing. This is crucial. Manimarco was expelled for conducting forbidden necromantic experiments that involved trapping souls. That's information that rulers, other magical organizations, and the general public should probably know about. If there's a guy out there who's mastered soul trapping and necromancy, people should be aware so they can protect themselves. But the Psijics kept it quiet. They handled it internally and didn't tell anyone. Maybe they thought it would reflect badly on the Order if people knew they trained a necromancer. Maybe they didn't think it was anyone else's business. Maybe they just didn't care what happened as long as it happened somewhere other than Artaeum. Vanus Galerion was furious about this. He couldn't believe they would just release Manimarco without warning anyone or taking responsibility. The lore specifically mentions that Vanus confronted Iakisis about the decision. He argued that just expelling Manimarco wasn't enough, that they needed to actually stop him and warn others. Iakisis essentially told him it was handled and to drop it. This was one of the reasons, maybe the main reason, that Vanus eventually left the Order to found the Mages Guild. He saw the Psijics' elitism and secrecy as fundamentally dangerous. They had let Manimarco become a threat through negligence, then failed to deal with that threat responsibly, and now they were covering it up. That's not wisdom, that's moral cowardice. So what happened next? Manimarco left Artaeum and relocated to mainland Tamriel. Free from any supervision, he began practicing necromancy openly. He founded the Order of the Black Worm, a necromantic organization that would spread across Tamriel and persist for thousands of years. He recruited dark mages, outcasts, witches, and reachmen into his organization. He offered them power and knowledge without the Psijics' restrictions or moral judgments. And he was successful. Really successful. The Order of the Black Worm became one of the most feared organizations in Tamriel. In many places, necromancy was illegal and necromancers were hunted. But Manimarco was powerful enough and clever enough to not only survive but thrive. He established cells across the continent. He infiltrated noble courts. He made deals with rulers who valued his power more than they feared his methods. In Cyrodiil, he actually convinced the Tharns to legalize necromancy and recognize the Order of the Black Worm as the official magical advisors to the imperial throne, replacing the Mages Guild in that role. Think about that. He became so influential that he could change imperial policy and displace the largest magical organization in Tamriel. That's the level of power and political acumen he achieved. He developed black soul gems, one of his most harmful inventions. Regular soul gems can only trap the souls of animals and beasts, white souls as they're called. The souls of sentient beings, black souls, were protected by something called the consecrations of Archai. Trapping a black soul required special circumstances or special tools. Manimarco figured out how to create gems that could circumvent these protections. Black soul gems could trap any soul, including those of humans, elves, and other thinking beings. And the process for creating them involved exposing normal soul gems to the light of the necromancer's moon, which may or may not have been Manimarco himself in some form, depending on which timeline you're in. It's complicated. He partnered with Vastaria, another former Psijic student, to retrieve a cache of black soul gems from Cold Harbor. Vastari had left the Order around the same time period, also disagreeing with their approach. She and Manimarco shared the goal of advancing soul magic, and she helped him spread black soul gems throughout Tamriel. This is important because it shows the Psijic Order's failure had ripple effects. It wasn't just Mani Marco. Other students who left the order took skills and knowledge they learned and used them in ways the Psijics would disapprove of. The order had become a training ground for people who would go on to cause significant harm, and they took no responsibility for any of it. Mani Marco consulted with Daedric princes. Multiple sources suggest he had dealings with Molag Bal, the Daedric prince of domination and corruption. He studied the dragon priest's methods for controlling Draugr. He sought out ancient Aelid texts about summoning the dead. He found and studied the Crimson Book of Skulls, which even the legendary Shalador had tried to destroy because it was too dangerous. He was building the most comprehensive necromantic knowledge base in history, and he was using it, not just for research, but actively. He raised armies of undead. He trapped souls by the hundreds or thousands. He corrupted other mages and turned them to necromancy. He was everything the Psijics should have prevented, and they'd done nothing. During the Second Era, in the year 582, Mani Marco joined the Five Companions. This was the group working with Varen Aquilarios to perform a ritual that would relight the dragonfires and legitimize Varen's claim to the imperial throne. The Five Companions were Varen Aquilarios himself, Lyris Titanborn, Sai Sahan, Abnur Tarn, and Mani Marco. None of them knew about Mani Marco's past with the Psijics. None of them knew he was a necromancer of unprecedented power. None of them knew he'd been expelled from the most prestigious magical organization in Tamriel for conducting forbidden experiments. Why? Because the Psijics had never told anyone. This was hundreds of years after his expulsion. If the Psijics had publicized what Mani Marco was and what he'd done, that information would have spread through magical circles. Abnur Tarn was an extremely well-connected imperial battle mage. If warning about Mani Marco existed, Tarn would have known. Varen was working with the most knowledgeable people in the Empire. Someone would have known. But they didn't, because the Psijics kept it secret. And so Mani Marco was able to infiltrate the Five Companions, gain their trust, and wait for the perfect moment to betray them. When they performed the ritual to relight the dragonfires, Mani Marco corrupted it. Instead of legitimizing Varen's claim, the ritual shattered the barriers between Nirn and Oblivion. It allowed Molag Bal to anchor Tamriel to Cold Harbor and begin pulling the two planes together. This was the Planameld, and it would have enslaved or killed everyone on Tamriel if it had succeeded. Mani Marco was working for Molag Bal. That was his plan all along. Get the Five Companions to perform a ritual that would give Molag Bal access to Nirn, help the Daedric prince conquer the mortal world. In exchange, Mani Marco got power, knowledge, and maybe the promise of ascending to even greater heights. The Planemelt caused catastrophic damage. The Three Banners War was already devastating Tamriel, with three separate alliances fighting for control of the imperial city. Now add an invasion by Daedric forces, with Molag Bal's minions pouring through rifts between planes. Cities were destroyed, countless people died or were enslaved. Reality itself was being torn apart as Nirn and Cold Harbor merged. The Vestige, the player character in ESO, eventually stopped the Planamelt with the help of the reformed Five Companions. But the damage was immense. The Empire never fully recovered from this period. The chaos of the Interregnum continued for centuries afterward. And all of this happened because Mani Marco was able to position himself as a trusted advisor, which he could only do because nobody knew his history. This is a direct consequence of Psijic secrecy. They knew Mani Marco was dangerous. They'd known for centuries. They expelled him for crimes that should have been publicized. But they kept it quiet, and as a result, he nearly caused an apocalypse. And during all of this, where were the Psijics? Artaeum had returned by this point. They were back in Tamriel. But they didn't intervene. They didn't help the five companions fight Molakbal's forces. They didn't use their time magic to prevent the ritual from being corrupted. They sat on their island and studied while the world burned. After the plane meld was stopped, Manimarco continued causing problems. He appeared in Daggerfall during the warp in the west and obtained the totem of Tiber Septim. He used it to achieve some form of apotheosis, becoming a divine being in at least some timelines. There's literally a celestial body called the Necromancer's Moon that appears in the night sky, and it's associated with Manimarco. Necromancers can draw power from it. In the Third Era, around the year 433, Manimarco launched an all-out assault on the Mages Guild. This was centuries after the plane meld, and he was still active, still dangerous, still causing harm. He devastated the guild's organization, he killed countless members, and in a final act of cruelty, he reanimated Vanus Galerion, his old friend and rival from the Psijic order, as his personal, undead servant. Vanus Galerion had died centuries earlier fighting Manimarco's forces. He'd left the Psijic order and founded the Mages Guild specifically to oppose the kind of elitism and secrecy that let Manimarco become a threat. He'd spent his life trying to democratize magic and fight necromancy, and Manimarco turned him into an undead thrall. That's the level of evil we're talking about. The hero of Kavach eventually defeated Manimarco during the events of Oblivion, but the Order of the Black Worm survived. Other necromancers took up his mantle. His knowledge and his influence persist into the Fourth Era and beyond. Let's trace the complete line of causation here. 1. The Psijic Order trains Manimarco and gives him access to advanced magical knowledge. 2. Manimarco uses that knowledge to study necromancy and soul magic, developing techniques that would allow him to become one of history's most powerful necromancers. 3. The Psijics discover what he's doing and expel him, but don't stop him, don't publicize what he's done, and don't take any responsibility for having trained him. 4. Manimarco founds the Order of the Black Worm and spreads necromancy across Tamriel, recruiting followers and developing more dangerous techniques. 5. He creates and spreads black soul gems, enabling the mass trapping of sentient souls. 6. Vanus Galerion leaves the Psijic Order in disgust at how they handled the situation and founds the Mages Guild. 7. Manimarco infiltrates the Five Companions because nobody knows his history. 8. He helps Molakbal launch the plane meld, nearly destroying Tamriel. 9. He achieves some form of godhood during the warp in the west. 10. He assaults the Mages Guild in the Third Era, devastating the organization and desecrating Galerion's memory. All of this, thousands of years of death, destruction, and suffering, traces back to that original decision by Iekesis and the Psijic Council to simply expel Manimarco instead of taking responsibility for what he'd become while under their tutelage. They had the power to contain him, they had the knowledge to understand what he might do, they had the responsibility to either reform him or neutralize him as a threat. They chose to do neither. They just removed him from the island and hoped he'd become someone else's problem. How many people died because of that decision? How many souls were trapped? How much suffering did Manimarco cause over the course of millennia, all because the Psijics couldn't be bothered to actually take responsibility? And what have the Psijics ever said about this? Have they admitted it was a mistake? Have they apologized to all the people who suffered because of Manimarco's actions? Have they expressed any regret about training one of history's greatest monsters and then releasing him into the world? Of course not. They don't explain themselves, remember? Acknowledging that failure would undermine their position as wise guardians. It would suggest they're fallible, that their judgment can be wrong, that their methods might have consequences. So they just ignore it and carry on as if they're infallible. The Manimarco situation is the perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with the Psijic Order. They train dangerous people, They fail to supervise them properly, they refuse to take responsibility when those people cause harm, and they keep everything secret so nobody else can learn from their mistakes or prepare for the consequences. It's institutional negligence wrapped in a veneer of wisdom. So Vanus Galerion left the order, disgusted with how they'd handled Manimarco and frustrated with their general approach. In the year 230 of the Second Era, Galerion proposed the creation of a new organization to Right Master Iachesis and King Rilis XII of First Hold. This organization would become the Mages Guild. The philosophy behind the Mages Guild was explicitly opposed to how the Psijics operated. While the Psijics hoarded knowledge and only shared it with those they deemed worthy, the Mages Guild would make magic accessible to anyone who could pay for it. Anyone could join, anyone could learn. Anyone could purchase potions, spells, or enchanted items. The lore says Galerion gave some kind of speech to convince Iachesis and the king to approve the charter, but what exactly he said wasn't recorded. Scholars like to speculate about what lies and persuasions he might have used, which is interesting phrasing. It suggests there was something questionable about how he pitched the idea, or that he had to work around Psijic objections. The Mages Guild grew rapidly. Within decades, it had spread across Somerset and then to mainland Tamriel. Some rulers initially rejected it, but eventually almost everywhere accepted the guild. It became one of the most powerful organizations in all of Tamriel, and it was built on the principle of democratizing magic, the exact opposite of what the Psijics stood for. Here's something interesting though. Right around the time the Mages Guild was founded, Artaeum vanished for 500 years. Coincidence? Maybe. But it's also possible the Psijics saw the writing on the wall. Their monopoly on advanced magical knowledge was being broken. An organization with opposite principles was gaining power and legitimacy. Maybe they couldn't handle that, so they just removed themselves from the equation entirely. When Artaeum returned 500 years later, the Mages Guild was the dominant magical organization in Tamriel. The Psijics had lost their influence, and that original council that would have known why they left and what happened, gone, just completely missing. It's almost like the Psijics who returned didn't want to explain themselves to the new reality they found. Let's talk about one of the most consistent criticisms of the Psijic order across all sources. They hoard knowledge. The lore explicitly says they've often been criticized for hoarding their knowledge and in turn mocking other scholars for not seeing their way. Think about that second part. They hoard knowledge and they mock people for not understanding things. It's not enough that they keep secrets, they actively look down on others for not knowing secrets that the Psijics themselves refuse to share. That's not just elitist, that's cruel. The order is loath to share their learnings beyond Artaeum. When they did interact with the world, they kept the majority of their knowledge to themselves. Lawrence Schick, the lore master for Elder Scrolls Online, is quoted as saying, "The Psijics have little interest in teaching anybody anything. They claim to be dedicated to knowledge for its own sake, that knowledge is its own reward. But if knowledge is truly valuable, why not share it? If you genuinely believe in learning and understanding, why would you restrict that?" The Psijics act like knowledge is currency, something to hold on to maintain their position of power. Even within the order itself, this was controversial. Vanus Galerion wasn't the only one who objected. The sources mention that even within the order itself, this self-seclusion, and some might say selfish hoarding of knowledge, was not without its critics. Multiple Psijics over the years recognized that what they were doing was wrong. And here's the kicker, when they do deign to share knowledge, it's only with people they consider worthy or who can meet them on an equal basis. But they're the oldest, most powerful magical organization in Tamriel. They have abilities nobody else has. They can manipulate time. They have millennia of accumulated knowledge. Nobody can meet them on an equal basis because they've spent all that time ensuring nobody else could. It's a rigged game. They keep knowledge to maintain their superiority, then use that superiority as justification for keeping the knowledge. They've created a self-reinforcing cycle where they get to be the gatekeepers of magical understanding, and anyone who objects just proves they're not worthy to learn. This worthiness thing keeps coming up, so let's examine it more closely. According to Tolfdir at the College of Winterhold, the Psijic order only deals with whoever they believe is worthy. Who decides worthiness? The Psijics do. What are the criteria? They don't say. How do you prove yourself worthy? You don't know until they show up and decide for you. In Skyrim, they choose to interact with the Dragonborn. But why? The Dragonborn at that point is just some student who found an artifact in some ruins. Yeah, turns out that artifact is super important, but the Dragonborn didn't know that. They just stumbled into it, and suddenly the Psijics are watching, judging, and eventually deciding this person should be the next Archmage. Which brings up another point. They manipulated that entire situation. They tell you later that making the Dragonborn into Archmage had been the Order's intent from the start. They engineered that outcome. They didn't help the Dragonborn because of who they were. They helped because the Dragonborn was useful to their plans. Once the Eye of Magnus was secure, they just disappeared again. Mission accomplished, goodbye. They do the same thing in ESO. They let the Vestige join because they're useful for dealing with time breaches and other problems. It's not about the Vestige's character or their commitment to learning. It's about utility. The moment you stop being useful to the Psijic's agenda, you're forgotten. This dealing only with the worthy thing is really dealing only with whoever serves our purposes at the moment. It's transactional. They don't have allies or students in the traditional sense. They have tools they temporarily use. We need to talk about the Psijic Order's time magic, because this is where things get really concerning. They can stop time, slow it down, speed it up, or rewind it. They can peer into alternate timelines and realities. They can sense disruptions in time, like time breaches and time knots. They can even transport objects or people through time. In Skyrim, Quaranir casually stops time so he can talk to the Dragonborn privately. Everyone else in the room just freezes. He mentions this requires great effort and can't be maintained for long, but he still does it. Later, when they take the Eye of Magnus, they demonstrate even more power by transporting this massive artifact to wherever they took it. Probably Artaeum, but we don't actually know. They never tell anyone. In ESO, the Psijics are dealing with time breaches and knots all across Tamriel. These are literal ruptures in time that are causing chaos, and the Psijics have the ability to seal them. That's incredibly powerful, but it raises questions too. If they can see into alternate timelines, they can view possible futures. If they can scry the fate lines to see what might happen, they have foreknowledge that nobody else has. They would know the consequences of their actions, or at least some possible consequences, before they act. That means every time they choose not to act, it's an informed decision. They know what might happen if they don't intervene, and they choose not to anyway. Remember Manimarco? They might have been able to see what would happen if they just expelled him. Maybe they did and decided the Mages Guild needed to be humbled. Maybe they couldn't see it, which means their abilities have limits they don't admit to. Either way, it doesn't look good. And there's another angle. If you can manipulate time, you can manipulate history. You could change events that already happened. You could prevent something from occurring by going back and altering the circumstances. The Psijics could theoretically rewrite reality to fit their preferences, and nobody would ever know, because to everyone else, it would have always been that way. The lore mentions they can access temporal tomes that spoke of alternative timelines and realities, the many paths where certain key events transpired differently. They study what could have been, They know how things could have gone differently. That's God-level knowledge, and they keep it to themselves. Let's circle back to what happened with Iachesis and the original council, because this mystery is central to understanding why the Psijics can't be trusted. Iachesis was the Rite Master of the Psijic order for an absurdly long time. The earliest recorded instance of the order is in the year 20 of the First Era, when a Breton sage named Vornet met with Iachesis. Then Iachesis was still Rite Master in the year 2920 of the First Era, when he met with Sotasil. He was there when Vanus Galerion founded the Mages Guild in Second Era 230. He's recorded as Rite Master as late as Third Era 110, when he met with Queen Potema. That's over 2,000 years, possibly closer to 4,000, depending on how long before the recorded instance he'd been leading the order. Psijics use life extension magic, so members can live for centuries or even millennia. But Iachesis was ancient even by those standards. Then when Artaeum vanished for 500 years and returned, Iachesis and the entire council were gone. The Psijics who came back either couldn't or wouldn't explain what happened. Nobody knows where they went or why they didn't return, and the Psijics who did return took over without providing any answers. Think about the implications. The entire leadership structure disappeared and was replaced, and nobody outside the order knows why. Did Iachesis die? Did he leave the order? Did something happen during those 500 years that removed them all? Or did they choose not to return for some reason? And why would the returning Psijics not explain? The obvious answer is that whatever happened, they don't want people to know. There's something about those 500 missing years that can't be shared. Something about why the original council is gone that would be too revealing. This is an organization that already hoards secrets, already refuses to explain their actions, and already operates with zero accountability. And their excuse for one of the most significant events in their history is just, we can't or won't tell you. That's not an organization operating in good faith. The relationship between the Psijic order and the Thalmor is fascinating, and it tells us a lot about both groups. The Thalmor consider the Psijics to be traitors to the Altmer. They react hostilely when encountering Psijic members. They see the order as a rogue organization that views itself as above the law. Now, the Thalmor are obviously the bad guys in Skyrim. They're supremacist, cruel, and totalitarian. So the fact that they oppose the Psijics might make you think the Psijics are good guys by comparison, but let's think about why the Thalmor hate them. The Psijics left Altmer society because they disagreed with religious and social changes. They rejected the elevation of certain ancestors to godhood, which was tied to aristocratic power structures. In a way, the Psijics were rebelling against hierarchy, but they also considered themselves superior to the Altmer who stayed. They thought Somerset society was corrupted. Fast forward a few thousand years, and you have the Thalmor, who represent an extreme version of Altmer supremacy and hierarchy. The Psijics, who rejected the early forms of this social structure, are still around and still separate. To the Thalmor, the Psijics represent an alternative form of Altmer power that doesn't fit their worldview. But here's the thing, both groups think they're superior to everyone else. The Thalmor think they're superior because they're Altmer. The Psijics think they're superior because of their knowledge and magical power. They're two sides of the same coin, just with different justifications for their elitism. The rogue organization comment is interesting too. From the Thalmor perspective, the Psijics don't answer to anyone. They have massive power and they don't acknowledge any authority above themselves. They disappeared for 100 years and returned without explaining why. They appear and disappear when they want. They take artifacts they deem too dangerous for others to have. They don't submit to any oversight. Ancano, the Thalmor agent at the College of Winterhold, explicitly calls them a rogue organization and says they view themselves as above the law. He's antagonist, and you're supposed to oppose him, but is he wrong about this specific point? The Psijics do view themselves as above the law. They operate outside all governmental and institutional structures. They make their own rules and enforce them as they see fit. The entire College of Winterhold questline in Skyrim is basically a demonstration of everything concerning about the Psijic Order. Let's break down exactly what happens and what it reveals. The college discovers the Eye of Magnus in Sarthal. It's an ancient artifact of immense power. Ankano, the Thalmor advisor at the college, starts getting interested in it. Then the Psijics show up. They tell the Dragonborn the eye is dangerous and shouldn't fall into the wrong hands. They know what it is, they know what it can do, but they don't explain. They just issue warnings and disappear. Why not tell the college exactly what the eye is? Why not explain what Ankano might be planning? Why speak only to the Dragonborn in frozen time instead of addressing the whole college? Because they don't think anyone else needs to know. They've already decided how this situation needs to be handled, and everyone else is just supposed to trust them and go along with it. Ankano ends up tapping into the eye's power, which puts the entire college and possibly the world at risk. The Dragonborn has to get the Staff of Magnus to counteract the eye. They fight Ankano and eventually defeat him, and then the Psijics show up, congratulate the Dragonborn, declare the eye is too unstable to remain in the world, and just take it. Poof, gone. They take this artifact that was discovered by the college, that the college fought to protect, and they confiscate it without asking permission. Quaranir says the world is not ready for such a thing and removes it. To where? Artaeum probably, but again, they don't say. What will they do with it? Keep it safe, supposedly, but there's no oversight. Nobody else gets to verify that they're actually keeping it safe. You just have to trust them. And then Quaranir names the Dragonborn the new Archmage of the college, without consulting anyone, without letting the college's members vote or decide. He just declares it and leaves. The Psijics engineered that outcome from the beginning. They admitted it was their intent all along. They manipulated events to put the person they wanted in charge of the college, and then they took an artifact that wasn't theirs. Think about this from the college's perspective. An outside organization they have no relationship with interfered in their affairs, manipulated their leadership structure, and stole an artifact they discovered. The fact that it worked out okay for everyone doesn't change that the Psijics acted unilaterally with no accountability, and this is a pattern. The lore mentions the Psijics collecting magical relics all over Tamriel because they believe such relics in the wrong hands would bring about bad change. They store everything in the vault of Mo'Wida on Artaeum. But who decides what's too dangerous? They do. Who verifies that they're really just storing these artifacts safely and not using them? Nobody. You just have to trust the organization that already lied by omission about Manimarco, that hoards knowledge, and that literally removes itself from reality when it wants to avoid scrutiny. During the interregnum in the Second Era, Manimarco managed to infiltrate another group. He became one of the 5 companions working with Varen Aquilarios to relight the dragon fires in the imperial city. The 5 companions were trying to perform a ritual that would legitimize Varen's claim to the empire. The fact that Manimarco could join this group without anyone knowing his history is damning for the Psijic Order. This was hundreds of years after his expulsion, but apparently nobody knew. The Psijics had never publicly revealed that one of their former students was a necromancer and a threat. Abnur Tharn, one of the 5 companions, was an extremely well-connected Imperial battle mage. If the Psijics had bothered to warn anyone about Manimarco, that information would have spread through magical circles. Tharn would have known. Varen would have known. But they didn't know because the Psijics kept it quiet, and so Manimarco was able to betray the five companions, corrupt the ritual, and help Molag Bal launch the Planimeld. The Planimeld was an attempt to merge Nirn with Cold Harbor, Molag Bal's Daedric realm. It would have enslaved or killed everyone on Tamriel. This is a direct consequence of Psijic secrecy. They knew Manimarco was dangerous. They'd known for centuries. They did nothing to warn anyone or stop him beyond simply expelling him from their island, and as a result, he nearly caused an apocalypse. During the Plainmeld crisis, where were the Psijics? Artaeum had returned by this point. They were back in Tamriel, but they didn't intervene. They didn't help the five companions fight Molag Bal's forces. They didn't use their time magic to prevent the ritual from being corrupted. They sat on their island and studied while the world burned. The Vestige, the player character in ESO, eventually stops the Planimeld with the help of the reformed five companions. But the Psijics contributed nothing. They only got involved later when dealing with the fallout, time breaches, and other disturbances caused by the crisis. They're happy to clean up after the fact, but they won't prevent catastrophes. When the Psijics return in the ESO Somerset expansion, their return itself is suspicious. Artaeum had been missing for over 350 years. Then suddenly, Psijic agents start appearing in Tamriel again, warning about threats to the Clockwork City. The island itself remains hidden, but Psijics are active in the world. Why did they return? Because they saw a threat they cared about. There was a conspiracy threatening Somerset, and that finally motivated them to emerge from wherever they'd been. Apparently, the Plainmeld wasn't enough to bring them out. The collapse of the Mages Guild during the Alliance War wasn't enough. Multiple world-threatening crises happened during their absence, but none of those mattered enough for them to help. When you join them in ESO, they're dealing with time breaches across Tamriel. These are dangerous rifts that are causing temporal distortions, and the Psijics have you running around closing them. Which is great, these breaches are dangerous. But the question is, did the Psijics cause these breaches, or at least contribute to them? Time magic is incredibly dangerous. The Psijics use it constantly. They can stop time, they can scry the future, they can access alternate timelines. Every time they manipulate time, they're putting stress on the fabric of reality. And suddenly, there are all these time rifts that conveniently require Psijic expertise to fix. It's almost like they're cleaning up their own mess while acting like they're doing everyone a favor. And the Somerset questline reveals more Psijic secrets. There's a sealed vault on Artaeum that contains Manimarco's old experiments. They didn't destroy his necromantic research, they stored it. Why? For study? For potential use later? They won't say. There are also all these ruins on Artaeum that have fallen into disrepair. The island was clearly designed to house more people than currently live there. Did the population decline? Were there internal conflicts? We don't know, because the Psijics don't explain. Looking at the people connected to the Psijic order over the years is revealing. We've already talked about Manimarco and Vanus Galerian, but there are others worth examining. Sotasil, one of the Tribunal of Morrowind, was associated with the Psijic order. He spent time on Artaeum teaching initiates. He's described in the lore as having an incredible understanding of the nature of reality. One quote from him goes, "There are layers to understanding all things." The common man looks at an object and fits it into a place in his way of thinking. Those skilled in the old ways, in the way of the Psijic, in mysticism, can see an object and identify it by its proper role. But one more layer is needed to be peeled back to achieve understanding. You must identify the object by its role and its truth and interpret that meaning. That sounds deep, but what does it actually mean? It's the same vague mysticism the Psijics always traffic in. There are layers of understanding, and conveniently, the Psijics understand more layers than you do. Sotasil was brilliant, no question. But he also went on to become a god, through questionable means, built a clockwork replica of Nern, and was eventually killed by Almalexia during her madness. Maybe the Psijic philosophy didn't serve him as well as he thought. Then there's Vastarie, another student who studied alongside Galerian and Manimarco. She eventually left the order and partnered with Manimarco to retrieve black soul gems from Cold Harbor. So another Psijic who decided working with the necromancer was acceptable. She had Psijic training and knowledge, and she used it to spread one of Manimarco's most harmful creations. Divite Fire, a Dunmer mage who lived for thousands of years, is described as a friend of Sota Sil and is associated with the Psijics. He experimented on Corpus victims in Morrowind. He kept victims in his tower and studied the disease by experimenting on people. That's not exactly ethical behavior, but he had connections to the Psijics, so apparently that was fine with them. There's a pattern here. The Psijics either directly train people who cause massive harm, or they associate with powerful mages who have questionable ethics. And when these people do terrible things, the Psijics never take responsibility for having trained them or worked with them. It's always they left the order, or they misused what they learned, or we can't control what they do after they leave. So what are the Psijics really up to? Let's look at some theories based on what we know. Theory 1. They're building a collection. The Vault of Moawita contains all these dangerous artifacts they've collected over the centuries. The Eye of Magnus is presumably there now. They've stored Manimarco's necromantic research. They might have other artifacts we don't even know about. What if they're not just keeping these things safe? What if they're building the most dangerous magical arsenal in Tamriel? Think about it. If you wanted ultimate power, you'd need ultimate knowledge and ultimate weapons. The Psijics have been collecting both for thousands of years. They have artifacts too dangerous for anyone else to have, magical knowledge that nobody else can access, and the ability to remove themselves from reality if anyone tries to stop them. That's not security, that's preparation. Theory 2. They're manipulating time to create their preferred timeline. They can see alternate realities. They know how events could unfold differently. What if they're actively working to ensure history happens the way they want it to? When they disappeared for 500 years, maybe they weren't hiding. Maybe they were changing things. The fact that Iachesis and the original council didn't return could mean they got stuck in an alternate timeline, or they sacrificed themselves to ensure the correct one played out. Every time a Psijic uses time magic, they could be nudging events in subtle ways. You'd never know, because reality would retroactively adjust. They could have prevented countless disasters or caused countless disasters, and we'd have no way to verify it because we only experience this timeline. Theory 3. They're serving some other entity. The Psijics claim to study the 11 forces and follow the old ways. But what if there's something else? What if their true allegiance is to Padome or some other cosmic force? They literally named themselves after Padome. They emphasize change as the most important force. What if they're not trying to protect reality but to facilitate its constant transformation, regardless of the cost to mortal lives? Theory 4. They know something about the future and they're preparing for it. Maybe the Psijics have seen something in the possible timelines, some threat so enormous that everything they do is in preparation for it. That would explain their collection of artifacts, their manipulation of events, their willingness to let people like Manimarco cause chaos. They're not being negligent, they're executing a plan that requires suffering in the present to prevent catastrophe in the future. But if that's true, why not tell anyone? Why not explain that they're working toward a greater goal? Because either they don't trust anyone else to help, or they know that if people understood their plan, they'd oppose it. Maybe the future they're trying to create is one that only they would want. Theory 5. They're simply elitist scholars who value knowledge over people. Sometimes the simplest answer is correct. The Psijics believe they are the smartest people in Tamriel and nobody else can be trusted with what they know. They intervene only when their own interests are threatened. They collect artifacts because they want them. They hoard knowledge because it makes them special. They're not villains with some grand scheme, they're just profoundly selfish intellectuals who've convinced themselves their selfishness is wisdom. All of these theories point to the same core issue. The Psijic Order has immense power and zero accountability. They can stop time, they can see possible futures. They can make their entire headquarters disappear from reality. They have artifacts that could destroy the world. They have magical knowledge nobody else possesses. And they don't answer to anyone. When they make mistakes, like with Manimarco, they don't face consequences. When they manipulate events, like with the College of Winterhold, nobody can stop them. When they hoard dangerous artifacts, nobody can verify they're actually keeping them safe. When they disappear for centuries, they don't have to explain why. This is fundamentally incompatible with trust. Trust requires some basis for verification. You trust someone because you know their incentives, or you can observe their actions, or they've proven themselves reliable, or there are consequences if they betray that trust. The Psijics offer none of that. You're supposed to trust them because they say they're wise and knowledgeable. They ask for faith, not trust. And faith is dangerous when dealing with this much power. History is full of powerful groups that claim to be acting for the greater good while actually serving their own interests. The Psijics have all the hallmarks of that kind of organization. They're secretive, check. They claim superior knowledge, check. They operate outside normal structures, check. They have power nobody else can match, check. They don't explain their actions, check. They collect dangerous weapons and knowledge, check. When they fail, they don't take responsibility, check. This is the profile of every dangerous conspiracy in history. The fact that they occasionally do helpful things doesn't change the pattern. Even harmful groups sometimes align with the public good when it serves their interests. Let's look at how different groups in Tamriel view the Psijics. The Thalmor openly oppose them and call them a rogue organization. Even though the Thalmor are terrible, they're not wrong about this specific accusation. The Psijics don't submit to any authority, and they do whatever they want. The Mages Guild has a complicated relationship with them. Galerion founded the guild in opposition to Psijic principles. The guild believes in democratizing magical knowledge, which is antithetical to everything the Psijics stand for, but the guild also respects the Psijics' power and knowledge. It's a relationship of professional rivalry mixed with grudging acknowledgement. The general public barely knows they exist. The Psijics keep such a low profile that most people think they're myths or ancient history. The average person in Skyrim has no idea the island of Artaeum exists or what the Psijics do. That kind of obscurity is intentional. It's easier to operate without oversight if nobody knows you're operating. Political rulers are wary of them. Some seek their counsel, but others have treated them with suspicion throughout history. Anyone with power understands that the Psijics represent an alternative power structure that they can't control. When you're a king or emperor, having an organization that can appear in your court, give you advice whether you want it or not, and then disappear without explanation is threatening. The College of Winterhold seems to respect them, but that might be because the Psijics just gave them a new archmage. Stockholm Syndrome isn't out of the question. The college was effectively conquered through soft power. The Psijics decided who would lead it and took what they wanted from it. The fact that it worked out okay doesn't change that it was a power move. Common mages and scholars who know about the Psijics tend to view them with awe mixed with frustration. The Psijics represent the peak of magical achievement, but they refuse to share their methods. It's like if the best scientists in the world formed a secret society and refused to publish their research. You'd respect their intelligence while being furious about their selfishness. There are so many questions about the Psijic order that remain unanswered. And the fact that these questions exist after thousands of years of the order operating suggests they'll never be answered. What happened to Iacasis and the original council? Where did they go during the first disappearance? And why didn't they return? What did the Psijics do for 500 years outside of reality? What are they doing during their second disappearance in the fourth era? What's really in the vault of Moawita? Beyond the Eye of Magnus and Mani Marco's research, what other artifacts are stored there? How many reality warping items have they collected? What are the 11 forces really? Why won't they explain what these supposed laws of reality are? Is it because explaining would undermine their mystique, or because the knowledge is actually dangerous? What do they see when they scry possible futures? Have they seen the ultimate fate of Tamriel? Do they know how the world ends? Are they trying to prevent it or cause it? Why do they choose to intervene when they do? What's the decision-making process? Why was the Eye of Magnus important enough to come out of hiding, but the Planemeld wasn't? Why didn't they help stop Dagoth-Ur in Morrowind? Why didn't they intervene during the Oblivion Crisis? What's their relationship with the Daedric princes? They have the Dreaming Cave on Artaeum that supposedly connects to Oblivion. They've studied the planes of Oblivion. Have they made deals with Daedra? Are they serving Daedric interests? How many Psijics are there really? When Artaeum returns, are there hundreds of members or just a handful? The island seems underpopulated based on how many ruins there are. Did something reduce their numbers? What's their endgame? Are they trying to achieve some ultimate goal, or are they just perpetually studying? If knowledge for its own sake is really their purpose, why take such an active role in events? Study is passive. They're definitely working towards something. As of the fourth era and the events of Skyrim, the Psijic Order is in an interesting position. They disappeared around the year 100 of the fourth era and stayed gone for about a century. Then they reappeared just long enough to deal with the Eye of Magnus situation before presumably disappearing again. This pattern of appearing only when they decide something is important enough is telling. They're not part of Tamriel's community. They're not invested in the well-being of the people living there. They're observers and occasional interventionists who maintain their own separate agenda. The political situation in Tamriel during the fourth era is chaotic. The empire is collapsing. The Aldmeri Dominion is rising. Skyrim is in civil war. There are dragons returning. The world is objectively in crisis. And where are the Psijics? On Artaeum, presumably. Unless they decide something threatens their interests, they're not helping. One could argue that they intervened with the Eye of Magnus, so they do care. But think about what the Eye represents. It's an artifact of potentially unprecedented power. If anyone else controlled it, it would shift the balance of power in Tamriel significantly. The Psijics couldn't allow that. Not because they care about protecting people, but because they need to maintain their position as the holders of the most dangerous knowledge and artifacts. The Thalmor are specifically mentioned as being in conflict with the Psijics. The Third Aldmeri Dominion represents an organized, powerful threat that the Psijics can't ignore. But during the height of the Dominion's expansion, the Psijics were gone. They disappeared right around the same time the Dominion was getting aggressive. That could be strategic withdrawal, or it could be cowardice. Either way, they left everyone else to deal with the Thalmor while they hid. You might be thinking, okay, so the Psijics are shady and elitist. Why does this matter? They're not actively evil, they're not conquering anyone, they mostly keep to themselves. Why not just let them study in peace? Here's why it matters. The Psijic Order represents unaccountable power, and unaccountable power is dangerous, regardless of the intentions behind it. Even if we assume the Psijics genuinely want to protect Tamriel and prevent catastrophe, Their methods are fundamentally incompatible with a free and just world. They hoard knowledge that could benefit everyone. Magical techniques they've developed could help people across Tamriel. Healers could save more lives. Scholars could make discoveries. Ordinary mages could achieve things they currently can't. But the Psijics keep all of this to themselves because they don't trust others to use it wisely. They've made themselves the arbiters of what knowledge people deserve to have. That's not wisdom, that's control, and it's self-reinforcing. By keeping others ignorant, they ensure others will seem less capable, which justifies keeping them ignorant. The Psijics have created a system where only they can be the wise ones, because only they have access to wisdom. They also demonstrate that might makes right. They can take artifacts because they have the power to do so. They can manipulate events because they have the magical ability. They can ignore all laws and structures because nobody can stop them. What kind of precedent does that set? If the Psijics can do whatever they want because they're powerful, why shouldn't the Talmor? Why shouldn't Manimarco? Power becomes the only currency that matters. Their secrecy enables harm. Manimarco caused incalculable damage over thousands of years. If the Psijics had publicized what he was and what he'd done, others could have been prepared. They could have fought back more effectively. People could have avoided him, but the Psijics kept quiet, and people suffered for it. Their disappearances leave everyone else vulnerable. When Artaim vanishes, all that knowledge and power is removed from the world. If something happens that requires Psijic intervention, too bad, they're not available. And they don't warn anyone before they leave. They just disappear, leaving everyone to deal with the consequences. One of the most frustrating things about the Psijic order is their pattern of non-intervention. They observe, they study, they collect knowledge about crises, but they rarely actually prevent those crises. The Planameld nearly destroyed Tamriel. The Psijics did nothing. Mehrunes Dagon invaded during the Oblivion Crisis. The Psijics did nothing. Alduin returned and threatened to devour the world. The Psijics only intervened because the College of Winterhold happened to find an artifact they wanted. If the Eye of Magnus hadn't been discovered, would they have helped with the Dragon Crisis? Probably not. This suggests that the Psijics don't actually care about preventing harm. They care about maintaining their collection and their power base. When something threatens their interests, they act. When it's just ordinary people dying by the thousands, they stay on Artaim and study. You could argue they're taking the long view. Maybe they can't intervene in every crisis. Maybe they're saving their strength for something even worse. But that's speculation. What we actually observe is an organization that claims to be dedicated to protecting reality, but consistently fails to protect the people living in that reality. And when they do intervene, it's always on their terms. They decide when and how and why. They don't coordinate with others. They don't explain their reasoning. They show up, do what they think needs to be done, and leave. That's not cooperation. That's unilateral action. We keep coming back to Manimarco because he represents the Psijic's greatest failure, and because that failure reveals so much about how they operate. Let's trace the complete line of causation from the Psijic's decision to expel him to the consequences. Manimarco is expelled from Artaim. The Psijics don't publicize why or warn anyone. He founds the Order of the Black Worm and begins recruiting dark mages. The organization spreads across Tamriel. Necromancy, which had been relatively rare, becomes more common because Manimarco is teaching it and creating a support structure for necromancers. He develops black soul gems, which allow the trapping of sentient souls. This technology spreads through his network. Vastaria, a Psijic exile, helps him retrieve a cache of these gems from Cold Harbor. Now anyone with sufficient power can trap souls, which leads to all kinds of abuse. Vanus Galerian, frustrated with the Psijic's failure to act, eventually leads an assault on Manimarco's forces. This culminates in a massive battle where both Galerion and Manimarco appear to die, but Manimarco survives or returns as a lich. During the interregnum, Manimarco joins the five companions. He betrays them and helps Molag Bal launch the plane meld. This nearly destroys Nirn. The vestige stops it, but the damage is immense. The Empire never fully recovers. The chaos of the Alliance War continues. The temporal disruptions caused by the plane meld create time breaches across Tamriel. Guess who has to clean those up? The Psijics. They finally get involved, not to help people, but to fix problems in the temporal fabric that their former students' actions helped cause. During the Third Era, Manimarco resurfaces in Cyrodiil. He has his own cult, political influence, and he's infiltrated the highest levels of society. When he launches an assault on the Mages Guild, the organization is decimated. He reanimates Vanus Galerion as an undead servant. Eventually, the hero of Kvatch defeats him, but due to the warp in the west, Manimarco also achieves godhood in some timelines. There's literally a necromancer's moon that appears in the night sky in his honor. He becomes a divine being that other necromancers can draw power from. All of this traces back to that original decision by Iacasis and the Psijic Council to simply expel Manimarco instead of taking responsibility for what he'd become while under their tutelage. They had the power to contain him, to prevent him from spreading his knowledge, to stop him before he became unstoppable. They chose not to. And what have the Psijics ever said about this? Have they admitted it was a mistake? Have they apologized to all the people who suffered because of Manimarco's actions? Of course not. They don't explain themselves, remember? Acknowledging that failure would undermine their position as wise guardians. So they just ignore it and carry on as if they're infallible. So, can you trust the Psijic Order? Let's think about what trustworthiness actually means. They're not transparent at all. They don't explain their actions or motivations. They're intentionally cryptic and secretive. There's no consistency either. They don't follow predictable principles. They intervene sometimes and not others with no clear pattern that anyone can see. What about accountability? Do they face consequences for their failures? No. They just remove themselves from reality when they want to avoid scrutiny. Can you count on them to help when needed? Absolutely not. They disappeared for centuries during major crises. Are they honest? It's unclear, but they definitely withhold information, which is just a form of dishonesty when you think about it. Are they competent at what they claim to do? Mixed bag. They're powerful, sure, but they've made catastrophic mistakes. Do they mean well? Maybe, but their actions suggest self-interest over actually caring about people. And humility? Forget about it. They act like they're always the wisest people in any situation and nobody else could possibly understand what they're dealing with. They don't cooperate with others. They operate unilaterally and expect others to simply accept their decisions without question. And empathy? Their pattern of non-intervention